Welcome back to another Low Spec Labs. So, a couple of days ago, I made a video on OpenClaw. And OpenClaw is an open source agentic harness, right? The idea is that it combines a couple different concepts from Cloud Code and from ChatGPT. So you get a nice web interface, but that web interface connects to an agent harness in the background that has access to your system and can run commands, install services, install applications, make API calls, send emails, lots of cool stuff. I played around with it, and the concept it's cool. The execution, eh, eh. One of the things I didn't like about OpenClaw was the token usage, right? I found myself burning through a lot of tokens unnecessarily. And that's because OpenClaw has stuff like a personality.md or soul.md that tries to give your agent a personality, which is cool, but I don't want my agent to have a personality. And then there's heartbeat scripts where the agent tries to stay alive and proactively do stuff, which is cool concept, but again, I don't want my agent to be proactive. Okay? At least not proactive in a way that I didn't explicitly design. So I looked around, did some reviews, or I watched some reviews, and I settled on OpenCode, which is behind me. And OpenCode is an open source agentic harness. And I like it because you can use it with OpenRouter, which lets you change the model that's steering the harness, which is nice for you to test different models. But you can also use ChatGPT in order to OAuth into OpenCode, and that lets you use your ChatGPT subscription. And the ChatGPT subscription for now offers double the quota it normally would, especially until I think the end of April. So for the next 2 months, you get double quota, which makes these things extremely useful. And during this time period, it would be a perfect time for you to go ahead and get your harness set up, because most of your token spend will be during your initial setup phase as you set up your different API interfaces, as you set up your different skills, as you set up different rules. After that, most of the stuff you'll have to do doesn't burn that many tokens. It might be 20, 30K tokens for it to figure out how to run some commands, get the output of those commands and verify responses. It's not that much. Most of the token spend is when you try to get it to set up skills or to follow the rules and logic of a skill. But there's ways around that, right? OpenCode supports subagents, which it'll come back later, right? But for right now, I've been using this to manage systems in my home lab. I'm not too familiar with programming. I can honestly say the AI can code better than I can by like 2 or 3 or 10x, right? And I don't have enough skill for me to look at it and be like, well, that's bad code. I kind of just have to trust what it's telling me. Or I can take what it output it into, paste it into another AI and be like, what do you think it is? Right. But then I'm trusting two AI, and who knows, maybe they're trained on the same data. So instead to test the model's functionality, what I've done is set up an environment for it to do some system admin tasks. I'm very familiar with systems, both Linux and Windows, and setting them up and configuring them and how hard doing different stuff on those systems is. And I've set the model out to do some of this stuff, and it performs incredibly well. Like, it performs very well. Now, managing systems is probably a lot simpler than writing programs, right? Like, it's difficult, but it's not as difficult as writing a database application. Two different levels of difficulty and two different types of skills. Managing the database, not the same thing as writing the database logic, right? But for the level of tasks I've assigned to it, it performs surprisingly well. GPT-4 or 5.4, very good. GPT Codex, very good. Gemini 3, very good. Like, I've been surprised by how useful these new tools are. I'm trying to see how far we can push it. So behind me, I'm trying to set up a memory skill. And this memory skill is kind of like a re-implementation of a memory idea I had for my micro agentic harness, but designed for bigger models. You know, the micro agentic harness has some limitations, and that memory skill is designed around that. This one has a couple more features that should help the model remember different context snippets across different conversations, which in theory will make it smarter, or at least give it more context over the problem we're trying to solve. We'll see. We'll see. I'm going to leave that memory skill optional for now so I can turn it off and try stuff and then turn it back on. And I might or might not share it. I've also developed a Proxmox skill, and when it comes to managing Proxmox, it's actually very competent, especially when it comes to creating services that are LXC, because it can spin up the LXC and enter the console and configure stuff, which is very cool. And with Linux virtual machines, you can set up Cloud Init and a console interface with Cloud Init and QEMU, and also get the same functionality, which is also very cool. So it's surprisingly useful. Surprisingly useful. Behind me in a separate tab is my OpenCode terminal. And right now I just have it installing SSH keys on different hosts. And it's very useful. I mean, that's like a 10-15 minute job. I told AI to do it. I walk away. It's done in like a minute or two. Now, the downside is now technically OpenAI might be able to get those API keys or my SSH pub keys or whatever keys I pass through using the model. You know, the inference isn't local. The thinking has to go somewhere. And on the back end, anyone that has access to the thinking would be able to see that. Now, OpenAI could claim they're encrypting that information, or they don't get access to it, or, you know, they scramble in the logs, or however they do it. But if you have access to the models, you can capture their thinking, which means anything that is sent into the models is now suspect. So that's something to think about when you're setting this stuff up. You know, you might be sending your passwords through. Congrats, OpenAI now has your passwords. And unfortunately, despite my testing, the local models are not quite good enough yet to be used with these types of harnesses, right? When you spin up OpenCode by default, it takes up like 8K of context just to get some basic functionality out of it. You know, that's how it knows how to do tool calls and other stuff like that. Most local models, they're like 4K context when you spin them up. And then the more context you add to them, their performance doesn't necessarily scale up. You know, you can give a local model 32K of context. So if you throw 8K of context at it, it still might fall on its face just because it doesn't know how to process that much information. Llama 2B, Quinn 3.5 2B. The local models are getting smarter and more performant year over year. So maybe in the next couple of years, they'll be good enough. You can slide them into a harness like this and really get a use out of them and not have to worry about them, you know, leaking all your secret private data off to a third party. So the cool thing about OpenCode is you can just kind of, once you get it set up, it's actually pretty easy to use, especially if you're familiar with terminal. And you can have it do stuff, hop back off of terminal. Like for instance, I just had it enable SSH pub key authentication into my Ansible host. So now I should be able to do SSH root path Ansible. And let's see what happens. And now I'm SSH into my Ansible host. So you can have it do stuff like that. You can also rerun OpenCode and resume previous session. So I can go back to switch session. And there we go. That was the last conversation I was having. And what I like to do is sometimes, depending on what I'm working on, I'll just go ahead and change the theme of the session, which you can do just by scrolling down here through the settings. And you can switch theme. And the different theme just lets me know what I was working on before. I can be like, oh, I was working on this thing on the green theme, and I was working on this thing on the blue theme, right? It's very useful. But when you do restart OpenCode, it'll go back to whatever theme you had configured by default. But for that, in-memory session is very useful, right? So we did our SSH pub key off. The next thing we want OpenCode to do is one cool thing you can use agentic harnesses for is basic network discovery. So, you want to find out what hosts are on your network, and you can do something like build a network discovery skill, right? That's basically a Python script that ties in Nmap, ping, and a couple other TCP network tools just to figure out what's running on your network. Tie that into one Python script, and then create a skill that calls that Python script with options. And then you can do stuff like load the network discovery skill, then create an ASCII diagram of current WAN network topology. Let's give it a second or two to think about that. And it found the network discover skill. And notice that it's using Python for this skill. And that's because the skill is a Python script. The skill tells it to call a Python script. And then all the logic for the skill is built inside of the script. And it just calls commands to activate different parts of that logic. What this does is it makes the skill deterministic, right? Large language models are non-deterministic by design. Ooh, look at that. Look at that. Oh my God. Look at that beautiful network diagram it just spit out. With some basic network info too. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Imagine how useful that would be if you were doing like an onboarding with a new client and you had to do network discovery inside of their environment. Now you know what host runs what. But also it is doing a pretty invasive scan of the network. So if there's any type of alerting or security tools, it is going to set off alarms. Do not run this in a corporate secured environment. But in your home lab, it's cool stuff. So let's see what's going on with my home network here. Let's see what the agent figured out on its own with just a basic script that it wrote itself, right? What I can infer is the local LAN topology from live discovery. We have some core infra. We've got domain controllers, Docker controllers, OpenCode, Graylog, Grafana, Ansible, right? And then we've got my Proxmox host that's accurate. Workstations, we've got some workstations and some other clients. We've got the physical lab hosts, right? And then we've got some virtualization hosts right there. It also discovered our gateway, our infra, our hosts. So that's a pretty decent summary that it was able to infer from the tools I gave it. Now, the cool part is you can go back. This is the stuff that makes AI so interesting. You can say, look through, review the logs of how you use the network discovery tool and present 3 possible improvements. Rank easiest to hardest to implement. So we just generated live data of how we use the tool. And the cool thing is, because the tool is Python based, and because when we designed it, we had to do logging and metrics data on how it used it, response time to the pings, right? Error messages, different stuff like that. And then we ask it to present improvements based off the metrics of its own use. Let's see, add empty engine warnings and summary hints, okay? Add engine health memory auto deprioritization, right? The logs are repeated low value engines. Add adaptive scan profiles based on observed LAN behavior. We're just gonna go with proceed with all 3 improvements. So most of those have to do with, I guess, core design of the skills, right? And how the skill rates result it gets during the network discovery process. So let's see, proceed with all three improvements. We give it the green light, and we gonna let it rip, boys. Right? What's pretty cool is that while you're using one skill, you can go back and stop it, and you can be like, load the sub-agent skill, and proceed. Right? So I have a sub-agent skill, which basically let the harness call other models. So it's the captain, it's the manager, and it can call a couple other, not as smart, but still decently smart enough to do some work, models, right? That just happen to be very cheap on OpenRouter. I did some testing, and it delegates work to it, right? So it'll have maybe 4 or 5 steps in the plan. It'll be like 3 of these can be delegated. I'll spin up 3 agents, delegate the work, and it really speeds things up. But something I also noticed is it keeps your context window clean, right? Because the model doesn't now have to like spend additional time spinning up, the framework for a script, building its logic out, stuff like that. Gonna be like, I just need, basically it keeps your model planning, and it offloads the doing of tasks to a slightly dumber model. And that makes your model's ability to plan and fix its own mistakes better. So the main advantage of OpenCode is basically the flexibility. You can swap out your models, you can swap out your sub-agents, you can enable sub-agents, which is very cool and very useful. You can, it's basically makes the LLM the Swiss Army knife of your home lab, right? The only limit seems to be whatever you can imagine, and you can get a pretty much a working result, which is very, very cool to have. Now, will it work? Yes. Will it work reliably? Oh, that's a different story. That's the difference between, a little toy project and something you actually might be able to sell to people. But as far as I can tell, when you ask it to do stuff that involves APIs or scripting or managing a system programmatically, it is more than capable of doing that. What does that mean for the future? I don't know. Do I want a non-deterministic system to have access to resources in my network? I don't know. I mean, this is cool stuff. But at the exact same time, I could see how it could go terribly wrong. If you hook this up to email and a hacker gets access to your inbox, or can even send a message to your inbox and the model reads it, it could go terribly wrong. So just don't hook it up to email. Sandbox it, lock it down. Just have it be a black box. The data goes in and data comes out. Have it be a magic computer. Lock the inputs and outputs. We'll test that out and see. But this is cool stuff.